Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Courtney Raymond, and I'm coming to you from OpenStax. And I'm joined today by Jeremy Morton, who is the founder of Expert TA, one of OpenStax's treasured partners, as well as Dr. Glenn Kreutz, who is senior contributing author to the OpenStax American Government text. We are going to, I have an agenda up on the screen for you. I'd like to invite you guys to share questions or comments in the chat as we go along, and we will respond to you as the webinar progresses, and we'll also have a time for FAQs and questions towards the end. So our plan for today is to start with introductions, so what we're doing right now. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of OpenStax and some tidbits about OER. Then Dr. Kreutz is going to take the floor and talk a bit more about the American Government text, and specifically the third edition that's coming out. Then Jeremy is going to give a tour of Expert TA's system, cover some FAQs, and also talk to you about their unique problem authoring tool. And then we will have time towards the end for any questions that we haven't been able to get to during the webinar itself. So once again, thanks for joining us, and we're looking forward to talking with you today, sharing with you a bit more about the OpenStax American Government 3E text within Expert TA and the new features that they've developed to complement the text and to enhance your experience. So, in case you aren't familiar yet with OpenStax, we are a publisher of open educational resources. We are based at Rice University, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, but used at schools throughout the country and throughout the world. Our specific mission is to transform learning so that education works for every student. And some particulars about our books. So we publish books for focusing on the highest enrolled undergraduate courses, so we're expanding into pathways beyond that as well. Each book is available in multiple formats, including our online formats, which are free. They go through the same peer review process and quality standards as traditional textbooks, but are openly licensed, which means that you can remix, reuse, revise, and redistribute them. And they cover the standard scope and sequence of introductory courses so that they can be widely adopted. And if you want to take a look at just to see what other schools are using and what that kind of map of usage looks like across the board, you can always look at our website, openstacks.org/global reach, and there's a cool interactive map there. You can see our instructors near me using this, is my alma mater using this. It's pretty interesting. So why open resources? So due to the high cost of textbooks, this is a study that came out, this was actually several years ago from Florida Virtual Campus. Students reported that due to the cost of textbooks, they're very likely to take fewer courses or not register for a particular course. A smaller number, but not insignificant, over 25% have dropped a course because of the expensive course materials. And then 20% have withdrawn from a course because they couldn't afford the course materials. So this is a big motivator for offering open resources. And I know Expert TA has partnered with us and worked to offer a homework solution that's a low cost for students while providing high value for some of these same reasons. Some of the additional benefits of OER to faculty are that every student has immediate and unlimited access to the content. I mentioned that the standard scope and sequence makes it easy to adopt. You have permission-free use and adaptation. The variety of formats means that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And then we have ancillaries that minimize faculty course prep, so they're already ready for you. I wanted to share some numbers on the impact of OpenStax. I put in progress because this time of year is when we're calculating what these numbers look like for the next academic year. So we're still finalizing these. I don't think we've shared these anywhere yet, but this is what we're looking at right now. About 5.8 million students are reported to use the book for this coming school year. Pardon that typo, 2021 to 22. We've had 22 million students use our books since we launched in 2012. We're in 65% of degree granting institutions in the US, and also in more than 100 other countries as well. We have 46 titles currently published, and we have 40,000 instructors assigning OpenStax textbooks this coming year. So specifically about American government, Dr. Kreutz will talk in more detail, but just so you know, we first published this book in 2016, the current edition published in 2019, and our third edition is actually publishing this week. Our print, it will be available in print later in the fall, so that usually follows about a couple of months after the online publication is available. And this book will, 3E will come with an instructor answer guide, a PowerPoint deck, and LMS cartridges to make it easy to integrate into Canvas and Blackboard. And so partnerships, we partner with other companies. Expert TA is one of our very first partners because they offer low-cost, high-value options to support instructors and students beyond the content itself. And so they enrich our material, and they also provide invaluable support to help us keep the books current and accessible. So we're a nonprofit, we are grant funded to create new titles, but our ability to keep the titles up to date at all times, to keep the content fresh and to maintain it on an ongoing basis, that's really supported by the financial contributions of our partners like Expert TA. So they're a really important part of the ecosystem of these open resources that we develop. And lastly, I just wanted to point out, if you go to one of our book pages, you can see there's a list of our technology partners. I have Expert TA shows here. They have a perfect 5-star rating right now. If you have used Expert TA before, I do encourage you to go to our website, openstacks.org/partners, and you can leave a feedback on your experience with them. And if you haven't, then go and see what other people have said about using the tool. But it's a really good way to see what other instructors have experienced using this kind of online homework that they provide, which we'll be learning more in detail about during this webinar. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to you, Dr. Kreutz. So let me stop sharing. And now the floor is yours.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Courtney. I really appreciate all the great work you and everyone at OpenStax does for such a good cause. Great to be with you all today. I'm Glenn Kreutz, privileged to be the content lead and senior contributing author on the OpenStax American Government textbook. So I want to talk a bit about the textbook and the third edition and sort of set up a bit the homework system that Dr. Jeremy Morton will talk about and show you in more detail a little bit later in the webinar. But first thing I want to do is just thank all of you who do introductory American government teaching. It's a noble cause that you all engage in, and gosh, we need more of it now more than ever, don't we, in terms of understanding of civics and citizenship and the system. And so just thank you for the important work that you do to create citizens and critical thinkers. There we go. So my goal for the OpenStax book, and you have a sort of an emblem there for the first, second, and the dropping tomorrow, supposedly the third edition. My goal was to cover in a free open source textbook the traditional topics of an American government one semester course in a rigorous yet clear and interesting manner. Okay, so that's the goal. The development process for this book originally in 2015-16 was that I had to propose a content lead structure and the way the book would be presented, the sections, the chapters it would have, the themes, and it was a competitive process where I had to interview and then was selected. I worked with OpenStax, one of OpenStax publication groups, Wisewire, on the original edition, as well as on the second and third edition. In outlining the chapters, I had to prepare 15 or 16 page chapter outlines for each chapter on what sections should be in there, what feature boxes were going to be utilized, what outside sources would be helpful for students to know on the internet. And then we recruited, and I worked with 10 different expert writers in addition to writing a couple of the chapters myself, As Courtney mentioned, I would say it was dramatically peer reviewed. It was peer reviewed at 3 junctures in addition to my reviews, plus OpenStax employs a fact checker on their editions, which I was pretty impressed with. And then the WiseWire firm did the pictures and the graphics work. And the lead editor I worked with, and we ended up having both my name and her name on each edition, the excellent Dr. Sylvia Waskowitz, terrific to work with. Right. And I was the content lead on obviously the first edition, but also the second, third editions. And I authored the changes in the second and third editions, again, with WiseWire and Dr. Waskowitz. So some of the highlights of the book, really the book has all the chapters you could ever want for an American government class, including both a federalism chapter and a state and local chapter later in the book under institutions. There's a separate media chapter, both a foreign and domestic policy chapter. Professors can adopt the entirety of the book, or they can take the book and chop it up into pieces. It's open source after all, and use it however they like. The flexibility of it's nice. We decided not to hit you over the head with one central theoretical theme. We decided instead to have multiple themes from which an instructor could launch as they teach the class. We talk about the themes of engagement, the theme of trade-offs, representation is a big theme in the book, the pluralism, elitism debate about American politics, preferences, I'll talk more about those in a bit, power relationships, and finally, there's a process theme that one might use. And that provides the instructor flexibility in how they utilize the book as a jumping off point for class discussion. We made a deliberate attempt in the book to make the defining sections or the definitional sections less dense than you might typically see, and we use a lot of examples. And a lot of the changes in the second and third edition reflect up-to-date examples. We have really good links to online sources, and we have what students like are the insider perspectives in each chapter. And then the nice thing about the open source online form of the book is we can update it quickly. We updated the first edition quickly after the 2016 election. And then we're able to do a full update, the third edition here in recent months. And so dropping tomorrow will be the third edition. The third edition contains the most significant changes since the first edition. That really reflects all the changes that have been occurring in American politics the last couple of years. We focus on deepening discussions of societal and personal impacts of government actions and policies throughout the book. We updated the book dramatically, I might say, for currency. So there are a wide array of new topics, tons of new visuals in the book that I think you'll like. Obviously, lots of new examples and many new references. We address social unrest, COVID-19 in many places, the 2020 election and the aftermath, which is still sort of being discussed, governance in the year 2021, and then significant changes in both domestic and foreign policy in American politics. We have significantly improved our coverage of diversity and representation. That was a comment received from many users after the second edition, that they wanted to see more in that area, and we've done that, including a significant revision of both the civil rights and civil liberties chapter. But that topic is also taken up in much deeper form in other parts of the book. We completed our work on the revision just last month. It's actually pretty amazing, and all credit to OpenStax for getting this out tomorrow. It'll be available fully open sourced and free online tomorrow at openstacks.org. The philosophy and pedagogy of the book, in terms of student learning, my goal with the book, as I proposed it and we implemented it, was and is to achieve depth and engagement by students. We really want a class on American government to move beyond rote memorization to analysis, to normative aspects, and get at some depth. The key for student learning is to first achieve descriptive knowledge, the knowing the stuff aspects, but then to also bring in these deeper explanatory and normative aspects so that students can begin to grapple with why and how and what ought to be, okay? Put in the form of questions, the key to learning is for students to move beyond what is types of questions to why and what should be considerations. And when students get to those deeper levels of analysis and reflection, that's when they really understand. And that's when they really know better the particulars of the system. They can begin to pattern better. And so, for example, if a student knows a bit about the design of the Congress, one of the institutions I studied in my research, they'll understand the key differences between the House and the Senate. The Senate we've heard a lot about lately because it seems to be a place where a lot of bills go to die. And so there's questions of supermajority, filibuster rules, things of this nature. And students can begin to understand the difference between the chambers. And when they understand that depth and why it's that way, they begin to think and have opinions about the design of the House vis-a-vis the Senate. They then are able to pattern better what they're seeing in the media about what's happening in Congress. So it's a kind of a self-fulfilling type of dynamic. And when that depth occurs, students perform better. They just inherently, when they're understanding the analysis or analytical level and normative levels of analysis, they're going to be able to recall and pattern better the particulars that one might test on an exam. Okay. So in the book, in terms of achieving that depth, takes the form of terminology, examples, many examples we give in the book, along with context. And then we use several conceptual frameworks. I referenced some of these before. Framework of engagement by students themselves, the pluralism elitism debate, representation, intense versus latent preferences. And that's maybe the most sort of intellectual of the frames we bring in, and that relates to how Americans and policy actors vary in how intensely they feel about particular issues. So there are a lot of issues that we might have an opinion on, but we don't have a strong opinion. But we've got a few things we care deeply about. So I, for example, care deeply about protecting rivers. I want rivers in America to have protection and to be there for future generations. And I feel intense enough on that where if someday I'm able to give to political organizations, I might give to American Rivers and Streams and other organizations. Whereas my latent preferences on aspects like user fees for car registrations aren't so intense that I might act on them. And understanding that intense versus latent aspect, which Madison wrote about in Friendliness 10, when he talked about factions, is important in having students understand our system and who is important and who matters. So that's laced throughout the book. And then the trade-offs perspective, probably most obviously given as an example these days when we talk about gun violence and sort of the trade-off between individual right to bear arms and collective societal safety. Okay, lots of trade-offs abound as we think about American politics. There are distinct sections of the book that progress in a logical way to help students achieve clarity and depth, begin with students and the system. We then move on to individual agency and action. That includes civil rights, civil liberties, public opinion, voting. We then have two collective action sections, one on what you might call the mediating institutions, includes the media, includes interest groups and parties, and then the formal institutions of government, the branches and different levels of government. And lastly, the outputs of government, including public administration or bureaucracy, as it's more popularly called. We have separate chapters also for domestic policy and foreign policy. Right? But if you really want to achieve depth with your students, really why we're gathered today, if you want to achieve depth with your students, I would encourage you to adopt the product I've offered with the Expert TA. Expert TA, as Courtney mentioned, is an authorized OpenStax ally. They produce accompaniments, ancillaries for many of the OpenStax books at a very low cost compared to the competition. It really achieves impressive depth for students. Okay? And so I worked on this homework system with Expert TA as I was revising the OpenStax book into the 3rd edition. Expert TA's interactive computing platform, as you'll see momentarily, is unequal in terms of taking students an analytical level of analysis as they work through the problems. It's also very instructor friendly, as Dr. Norton will demonstrate to you in a bit. By using the homework system, students will better understand the descriptive definitional aspects of American government, those what is questions, and more importantly, with the scores of interactive questions I've developed for each chapter, students will gain a deeper level of analysis. They'll be able to grapple with questions of why and what should be, those deeper aspects of learning that really help a student get to the next level in terms of their education. Okay. So a bit on those aspects. First, the descriptive or what is aspects in the platform. There are a battery for each chapter, a battery of multiple choice and true false questions. Also check all that apply. And that includes the entire bank of questions we developed for the OpenStax book, which is contained in the OpenStax platform along with the entire book itself. Plus, I created scores more questions for each chapter for the platform. The explanatory or why and how questions that I created begin to get to a deeper level of analysis, and those include drag and drop questions that are really pretty fancy. You'll see here in a few minutes. I've created questions in which students have to categorize. They have to also separately order things. And then I think especially helpful in political science and understanding American government are questions that have a spatial dimension. And so we have a question, for example, on models or theories of federalism that has the student through drag and drop order the different theories into different parts of a scale of either very centralized or decentralized. Okay, so the student, after reading the federalism chapter, has to think of these different theories: new federalism, cooperative federalism, unitary system, which is the most centralized, which is decentralized, and that begins to get more at some deeper thinking than rote memorization. And then the section I'm probably the most excited about in the homework system are the questions that force students to think about normative aspects and or the what should be questions. And we call these the drag and drop arguments. And these are adapted from a type of question I've used since the 1990s in all my classes, where students have to take a position on either side of an argument and marshal a couple points of support for their side. And what we've done is, for a series of arguments in every chapter, we've come up with a core argument on which a student can take one side or the other, and they're presented with a series of points of support that they then have to array into the proper side of the argument. And I'm quite excited about those. And so an example of that would be on marijuana. Okay, and so students always find it entertaining to talk about marijuana. There's always some giggles, at least when I teach, when we talk about marijuana. And a good example of an argument would be marijuana policy or marijuana regulations ought or ought not to be decided at the federal level. Okay, and so students could make the argument that ought to be a federal designation on marijuana regulations, or it ought to be at the subnational level. And they could think of points of support for either side. So what we present them in a drag and drop is a series of 6 or 7 points of support that they then array into either side of the argument. And thinking about these normative aspects, and as they're working through those problems, they're going to internalize a bit. What do I think? What do I think about that aspect of where the onus of policy power ought to reside on marijuana policy? And then lastly, one of the most unique aspects that Dr. Morton will get into is the feedback. Students have an option as they're working through the problems. If they give a wrong answer, they can, for a small deduction, you can set that up however you like, can receive sort of hints or feedback to then correct their answer before they submit it. So this interactive aspect, somewhat Socratic in places, I think further deepens learning. So I'm really excited about the truly interactive style of the questions that will push students to think of the why and the how, and as well as the what should be. And so those are the things I wanted to cover today, and talking about briefly about the book and the 3rd edition, and a little bit about how the homework platform came together. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Jeremy Morton, who's going to give a demonstration of the Expert TA homework system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for setting the stage so well and talking about the different aspects of learning and some of the ways that question types facilitate different things. I should say that Expert TA has been around since 2012. We are available for a range of subjects. We support a lot of OpenStax textbooks other than American government. And one of the things that has always been a goal of ours is to design sophisticated question types that are more than just multiple choice or true false, because they truly do get at different aspects of learning, as Glenn commented on before. And so you're going to be seeing examples of those today. I do have my screen pulled up already, and I just want to give an idea about the agenda and what we're going to be doing. It's a complex system where you have a lot of different configurations that can be done. In the amount of time that we have today, we're not going to be able to show them all. We're going to talk about the most compelling aspects of learning, those question types, how instructors can control how students interact with assignments and other things like that. If you find those compelling, then please reach out to us to get more information on other things. And just to give you an idea of what we will not probably touch on, to be able to effectively manage your class, you have to have things like the ability to view and manage your class roster, to look at grade sheets, to do a whole host of other things. Yes, those are required, but they're expected in most any online homework system. Of course, you have an area where you can get to your grades. So we won't look at those in depth. Again, if you find what you see today interesting, please follow up with us. You can either get an individual demo where we walk you through in more detail those areas, or we can provide you with the instructor user's manual for the system where you can see those for yourself. Okay, the steps that we're going to go through today, we're going to look at the main class management area that is available for both the students and the instructors. You can see that here. I'll talk in just a little bit more detail here in a second about that. We'll talk about instructor grade preferences and academic integrity preferences. Each instructor has his or her own ideas about things like the number of attempts that students should have as they're working through these online assignments, deduction values, and other things like that. And we want to demonstrate that we've programmed in quite a bit of flexibility so that you can design these assignments such that they match your philosophy. Once we look at the ability to control things like the grade preferences, we're going to go and we're going to create a class assignment together. You're going to do that a lot as an instructor if you adopt the expert TA system, and you need to know what it feels like. Once we create an assignment, we're going to go through and we're going to work this existing assignment that has example questions that touch on the breadth. And again, Glenn talked about this a little bit earlier of our advanced graphical suite, which includes drag and drop labeling, ranking, and then the arguments questions are captured in something that is like sorting. And so we'll go through and we'll work an assignment together. That's going to give you the main tour of the area that both instructors and students are regularly going to access. We're going to, of course, answer some frequently asked questions. And then we want to show our new problem authoring tool. Despite the fact that we've created hundreds of questions, we have every question from the end of chapter in the OpenStax American Government textbook from all of the editions. We have problems that Glenn has designed exclusively for our system, but some instructors still like to have the ability to create their own content, sometimes for an exam or a quiz, or sometimes just in general for homework. And we want to show you that you have that option. That's the way that we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so. And I just wanted to give you an idea of the agenda. Okay, what you're looking at here is Expert TA's main class management area. When either you or your students log in, you both see something that looks just like this. The students have one additional column in their table. It's at the far right, and the top header is status, which shows them whether they've done no work on an assignment, some work and partially completed, or completed the assignment. And that's the only difference between the student and instructor view. Towards the top, we have an area that we call additional class resources. It's in addition to the assessments that can be built out. So you can see here we have 3 links. One of these goes over to the American Government book as it is provided online at openstacks.org. Then we also have the 2nd and 3rd edition, depending on which one you want to adopt. And so if I click here, you can see that this takes us to a designed page that has the full PDF for the book and also has the broken out smaller PDFs at the chapter level, and then even down to a section level. Breaking this out this way and providing it here in the expert TA environment means they can get everything at one place. And it also affords for things like linking from a problem over into the specific material where that particular, and I say a problem, a question, linking over into the PDF section of the book where the content associated with that question resides. So this is the additional class resources at the top. Down below, we have all of the assignments that have been created thus far. When you first get an account, you won't have anything here, but as you go through and create assignments, this is where they'll reside. You can see there's some basic information like the weight of each assignment. Here, they're all equally weighted. The associated dates. We have the instructor grade preference template, which we're going to create in a moment, so you can tell which grading schema is being applied to a given assignment. And then if there is a timed assignment, we're actually going to create one of those. The amount of time that is allowed for the students will show up here. If you want a little bit more detail about a specific assignment, you can click the plus button, be presented with a list of all the problems, and then by mousing over those, you can be reminded of what's there. If you want to do anything more advanced, you'll need to left click and use the edit assignment to get into the more full environment. You'll see that here shortly as well. This is the basic class management area. And again, it's almost the same for students and for instructors. It's just the status column that students have. Great. We mentioned that the ability to customize the way students interact with an assignment is important. That's where we're going to go next. This is up here in a global area outside of the context of any given class. And so I'll click on under instructor, grade preferences. We're not going to go through this in detail, just enough to give you the idea about flexibility. When you first get your instructor account, you'll only have instructor default, but you have the ability to add as many templates as you want. And you, of course, can name them whatever is appropriate. So as we click between these, the structure of the form to the right is not going to change, but the values inside of these fields will. And so for something like a default assignment, you may want to give students 5 tries and count off a certain number of points. For a quiz, you might offer fewer attempts and change the deductions to increase those. On any given template, and I'll just select homework here, you can specify the number of allowed submission attempts. This allows your students to put in something that's not right. Instead of that being it, now they have a chance to correct. And that's always good for them to be able to be involved in the process of getting to a right answer. You can also control the deduction for each incorrect answer that's put in. You can control whether hints and feedback are even available. On a homework assignment, you probably want to make them available. On something like a midterm exam, if you're using Expert TA, then you may choose no here. You can also choose the deduction value that students will encounter based on accessing those hints and feedback. And we've actually done a lot of education and research on this. We'd be happy to make recommendations about good settings for each of these numbers. If you're interested in that, we'd be happy to connect you with some of those case studies and some of those education research things that we've done. Okay, looking down below just to show you more of what's flexible. If you are someone who allows late work, you can set that up, and you have a fair amount of configuration that can be done. So in this example here, the students would get half credit for any work done that was late for the entire window of time that late work could be done. But if you want to do something more advanced, like start them off with getting 90% worth of credit on the very first day that it's late, and then decreasing by 10% until it reaches a floor of 50%, you can do more advanced late work schemas like that. Now I see that there are some messages coming in the chat, and I'm just going to wait on those questions unless some member of the expert TA team thinks that it is important enough to answer in line, and I would just ask for them to hop in and pose the question to me verbally.
Jeremy, there's been a request for you to zoom in a little bit so that the screen's a little bit larger, even if it requires scrolling up and down.
Absolutely. So let's maybe even increase the size here. I've moved this up to 175. Hopefully that's going to be large enough. This will allow a little bit more scrolling as the presentation continues, but I understand that that's understood and accepted. Okay, so scrolling down, you can see here that we do have the ability to apply late work. This is just the schema for late work. When we're creating an assignment, that's where we'll be able to set the specific dates that the assignment is available, and then the dates that late work is available. Random variables really wouldn't apply so much in a non-STEM course. There's not a lot of numbers, but it's not ruled out. Random phrases allows you to have different wording and phrases inside of problems, and that actually can be helpful for an academic integrity standpoint, but I won't go into too much depth right now. One thing that I will talk about, though, is partial credit. You need to consider this. If partial credit is set to yes, then students can get a non-zero grade even if their final answer is not completely correct. So some of the questions that you're seeing will be drag and drop labeling. That's one. Imagine a problem that has 7 different things to be labeled. And even by the last submission, the student doesn't have it perfect, but they have 6 things in a right position and only 1 that's a mistake. The math can be done to provide credit for all the correctly placed items. And if you want students to receive credit for that, you can leave this as a yes. If this were clicked to no, they get a 0 if the answer is not perfect by the time they use up all of their submissions. Okay, there are some things here like free body diagrams that don't apply to American government, and we'll look past those. There's just a few at the bottom that I'll point out that are related to anybody who's in a position this coming fall where you have to do quizzes or exams in an online capacity. I know this has been a thing because of the pandemic, and so if anyone's continuing in that mode, things like using the Respondus lockdown browser is a great protection. And then also concealing whether a student's submission is correct or not. In most circumstances, when they put in a wrong answer, you want to let them know, provide them maybe with feedback, and let them adjust. In an online exam, you may just want to say, we've saved your answer, but they have no idea whether it's correct or not. This is the overview of most of the features that allow for customization of assignments and how students interact with those. And hopefully you feel like there's enough here to capture your own philosophy of grading. Okay, I want to move from here to academic integrity preferences. This is not my favorite topic. We care much more about the positive aspects of learning rather than trying to design features that police students, but it is important. And the simple thought is, no matter how good of an educational experience or exercise that you design, if students aren't actually going through the steps of that, they're not going to master the material. So what you want to do is highly encourage them to do the work themselves. You have a recommendation to make sure that on your syllabus, it's very clear what's allowed and not allowed. The next thing that we have is you can choose to present a screen every time students open an assignment, and you can include expert TA's terms of service. You can also include customizable text that you put in that are your own class policies for different types of assignments. And just like the grade preferences, if you've got different things allowed on homework versus quizzes, you can create different templates to be applied. And then finally, whether you know this or not, there are some answer sharing websites that are out there, and students will post their questions to have someone else provide the answer to those. And the way that they're normally doing this is by taking a picture with their phone and uploading it through an app to one of these sites or a screen capture. And so one thing that we can do here is provide in-assignment deterrence that's personally identifiable information, such that if they take those screen captures or pictures and upload them, they're letting you know, if you find these and search for these, who they are. So that's an example of an in-assignment deterrent. I don't want to go too much more into this. We have a few other features in our suite. Actually, let me just pull over one of these now. So even if a student decided that they were going to be smart, and I think this is more of a physics question, but when they go into a question and they black out this personally identifiable information, their username and their tracking ID, what they don't know is that one color value off of white is their student username presented here. It's not visible to the naked eye because we can't differentiate that small value off of white. But when it's a screen capture, a color replace can be done. And the thing that they posted does identify them as well. So there are definitely tactics to keeping students from posting things to Yahoo Answers and some of these other sites. And we have done those in the spirit of not having students hurt themselves by getting the answers elsewhere, but rather thinking through and showing up better equipped for the exams and a better understanding of the material because they've actually done the work. Okay, let's move on and create an assignment together. Up here under class menu, you have things like editing a class, viewing, managing grades, rosters, and things like that. This is your control set for the class level actions. One thing, I guess, before we create the assignment together, this is going to be covered in FAQs as well, but I just want to show because it's important to so many people. If I click Edit Class, I can configure my class for LMS integration. And I can choose between Canvas, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, Moodle, what we're adding Sakai, and several other LMS systems here shortly. It's a 10-minute process to get your Expertise account connected with, let's say, Canvas. And then students have single sign-on. They always just go to Canvas. They would click on a link for each of these individual homework assignments. They're routed to that correct assignment. And then any work that they do, grades are synchronized back over into that Canvas grade sheet. So that's something that's important. And while we were in the class menu, I wanted to go ahead and show that. Back to creating a class assignment. Again, you would do a lot of this. So let's go ahead and look at this now. In one screen, you have everything that you need. Now, we had several chapter level assignments. We didn't have any quizzes. I think just to make a timed assignment, we should make one of these. So I'm going to make a chapter 3 quiz. That's the name of this. The description is going to be optional. I can control the weight of the assignment. Maybe I want the quizzes to be twice as much on the syllabus as the homework assignments. I can now choose the grade preference template that I had created up here, and all those settings will be applied. That's convenient so that you don't have to do this each time that you create an assignment. And here we only have one template, the instructor default. You can see to the right, there's a collection of dates, and I'll just talk about these briefly. The publish date we normally have at the beginning of the semester. This is completely controllable by you, but most instructors want students to know what assignments are coming so that they can plan ahead. But if you've got something like a pop quiz, if you push this publish date out into the future, students won't even see it. So this is the first date that students will actually see the assignment in their list. Any work done between the start date and the due date, students will simply earn full credit for their work. Any work between the due date and the end date, any late work schema that we've designed up here in the grade preferences will be applied. And by default, there is no late work. I could easily push this out and have a week for regular work and a week for late work, or I could push this all the way to the end of the semester or the midterm, just wanting students to continue to practice as they study. We said we were going to make a timed assignment here, so we'll make this a quiz. We'll give the students 30 minutes. Okay, now that we've got most of the configuration set, let's go down in and add questions. You can see there's a drop down for books, and there's a drop down for chapters. Almost all of you are going to be using the Expert TA American Government Collection. These are all the questions from the book, the additional questions that Glenn has designed and we've helped him to get in. But we talked about problem authoring. So you may also have a book that only you and potentially you and your colleagues have access to, where any authored material goes in. These are supplemental questions that you can create. I will use the drop down here under chapters to select a chapter 3. As the instructor, I can show the answers, which is helpful, and I'm going to go ahead and expand all sections. And so then what I want to do is I'm going to try not to have to scroll too much. And so you can see some of the actions I'm adding questions. I'll scroll down and I'll add in problem 3.1. Well, this is a quiz. So one of the things we might want to do is make it harder for students to compare notes. And you can do that through what's called a question pool. If I just were to click and add problem 3.16 now, it would be added as problem 2 of this assignment. But if I click the radio buttons to the left of problem 1, now as I add additional questions, they're placed into that bucket. And that means that a third of the class is going to get each one of these 3 questions. So when students compare notes, they don't all have the same questions, and it's much harder to share answers. I'm going to click back up here and I'll scroll down a little bit more. Notice that to get this to be full screen, I've kind of lost sight of the top of this. And so I'll just zoom back up a little bit here so that we can see again, if I wanted to add more of these question pools, I can add a next question that also has 3, maybe 4 options. Now, a quarter of the class is going to get these different variations. And then finally, as I'm scrolling down, when I get to critical thinking questions, we've got a note here. These are not computer graded. These are essay questions, and we're just not doing that kind of automation yet. But we have a really nice environment for instructors to go through and apply grades if you choose to include questions like this. In the bottom section here, we have advanced graphical. These are the things that look like sorting or ranking. You can see here, drag and drop labeling. And so maybe at this stage, instead of having a question pool, we want every student to go through and to answer those 3 questions. This is what is entailed in creating an assignment. I can tell you from being around and used by hundreds of instructors at hundreds of institutions, they really like the design and feel of this. We wanted it to feel like you had taken a book in your hand, opened it up to the end of the chapter where you can see the problem statement, the question statement, any figures or graphs that are associated, and then in this multi-select question, all of the choices that the students will choose between. And prior to moving on, I would ask Jack, I'm not reading the questions as they come in through the environment. Are there any questions from the audience that we should address before we move on? Okay, I'll take that as a no unless he hops in, and I'll just finish out.
I think we got a couple, but we might save them towards the latter part of your presentation.
Okay, the only closeout statement that I'll make here is that the practice mode is used very heavily by our users. And interestingly enough, it's used both before and after occasionally. The idea of practice mode is you can come in here, set the dates that it's available, and the student can do additional work and access the assignment as many times as they want without changing their grade after the formal due dates for the assignment, so that they could go back and test themselves while working towards a midterm or a final. And if you use practice mode incorporated with question pools, each time that they try the practice assignment, they get a different version of this. And so it's very helpful for students to go through. It's a good exercise. Great. I'm going to choose to save and exit. I'm going to be taken back out to the class management area. And at this stage, I would ask for Glenn to come back on with me, because as I work through the example questions, he's going to be able to provide some really good comments about the design of the questions, some of the feedback that's available as we put in answers. And we'll do that now. So I will click to take this assignment. I'm presented with the honor code message, being continually reminded about what is and isn't allowed. Is a good thing for students to see. I'll click agree and continue. And we are zoomed in quite a bit, so there'll be some scrolling that'll be involved here. I may zoom back out just to 150 actually while we're in this environment. Your students would likely be at 100 and they would be able to see much more of the screen, but you're all familiar with trying to do presentations and how real estate is affected. Okay, this environment is fairly straightforward. To the left, we have all of the problems, which for this assignment is a lot. We have all of the problems, and the navigation is as I click on the different problem numbers, I'm simply moved through the assignment. I do have a status here as to whether I've completed the problem, still have attempts remaining, or have done nothing. This is the first question that I want us to look at. Even when we have multi-select or multiple choice questions, a lot of those draw upon the figures and graphs and schematics from the textbook. And this is one of those. I don't want to get bogged down in trying to actually work the question, but it's saying, look at the figure, which of the following is true? The students would have to weed through this information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 4 of these options here. I'm intentionally including one that doesn't belong so that we can see an example of feedback. As the students click submit, it lets them know that it's not correct. Based on the settings that I have, they've lost 4% for that incorrect submission. Students really appreciate the transparency that they see everywhere. And so they know that each incorrect answer will be 4%. They can see the number of attempts remaining is 1, and they'll lose 4% again per. But it also says here that specific feedback is available. And I'll click on this. We can just read a little bit. This is while the federal government provides some education funding to the states and localities, it constitutes only 2% of federal spending, and it goes on. Many of these feedback statements are designed in a Socratic manner so that it doesn't just give the student the correct answer. They have to put a little bit more thought into which of these items is really important. Some is more direct. We have a nice mixture. And I would just ask Glenn, do you have any other comments about the design of this question or feedback or anything?
Sure, yeah. The idea here is to begin to force students to understand what they're seeing. There's that initial look at a chart where someone's eyes kind of gloss over. And the way that we're posing the questions about many of the figures in the book really is going to take the students into the depth of what we'd like them to know. And as we've designed what you might call the strategically placed wrong answers, or distractors they're called in the system, we've done it in a way that is meant to facilitate learning, to, in some cases, as with this education example, to counter a strong conventional wisdom. Or erroneous conventional wisdom that the federal government really leads on education funding. They're really only 10 to 15% of all education funding in the country. It's more of a state and local matter. And so there's something to be learned there through this process. It's right there in the chart, but it isn't always the case that students on a quick first look will see that.
Great. Thank you for adding to that. If there are any questions that come in about these specific problems that we've got here and we don't get to them before we move on, I'm sure that either Jack or one of the expert TA team can revisit those. For now, what I'll do is I'll unclick education, which was the incorrect item, and I'll click submit. And we can see correct answer, student wind up with a 96 here. And maybe that's appropriate for getting to the correct result with only one incorrect attempt. But if your philosophy is that this should have been more like a high B level work and maybe an 88, then you can control that through the values in your own grade preferences. Okay, let's just click through a few of these. We're not going to work them because they're more of the multiple choice. And I'll zoom out just a little bit here. Multiple choice and multiple select as we go down through, but I did want to illustrate that they refer to maps, schematics, tables. There are questions that don't have these, but there are a lot that do, that really force the students to delve into this and introspect on some of these things. So let's move down to some of the more advanced question types. This is one of our advanced graphical, and it's very similar to drag and drop labeling. At this stage, I probably should zoom back in. It is very similar to drag and drop labeling, but we call this fill in the blank reading. So the government provides stability to society. We're not going to try to read this as a student. What we're going to do is just put in some of the answers that they would be expected to do. And so I've got services. It also regulates access. Okay, we have structure is something that the government creates. We are a representative democracy, but we're going to put in something that's incorrect, again, to demonstrate feedback. And then finally, the correct answers down here are political decisions and unlike an oligarchy. So the student has a few extra distractor items to look past. Here, there's only two. I know that in some of the questions that are designed, there are many. And I would just point out that when you're working a multiple choice question, a dynamic that can happen, the students look, they pick the one that they think is right. And when it's not right after their submission, they don't even think, they don't read carefully, they just click on something else. The number of combinations of ways, especially when there's more distractor items, the total number of combinations is such that that cannot be a productive strategy. You can't just start placing things. You'll never get to the correct answer. And therefore it does, we have seen in other subjects, accomplish getting students to look at this closely and think about the items and where they go. So when I click submit, again, it lets us know that specific feedback is available. And it says, while there are some elements of direct democracy in the US, the dominant form is representative. This is more direct feedback than Socratic feedback. And as I said a moment ago, there's a mixture of these things. So now I can go in and fix this. And we can see again, the student's gotten a 96 here. That could be very different depending on whether they access hints, how many tries they took, and the values that you have. Let's go down to question 13. This is a drag and drop labeling. It is similar to fill in the blank in that one item goes into one bucket. But here there's a background image, and this looks like some form of a modified table that's being filled in. And so I'll just quickly put in some answers here. So I'm going to make one thing that is a mistake, and I'm going to put disallowed voters down here at the bottom. Again, it's going to let us know that there's feedback there, and it indicates that the disallowed group is reflected in the difference between voting. And because it draws attention to this item doesn't mean that it doesn't belong. It could need to go into a different spot up here. And so the student does have to put additional thought in. It's not just telling them the correct answer. We will move that out, put this in place so that you can see once more the submission of a correct answer. Glenn, do you have any thoughts about either of the two questions that we've done so far, in addition to what I've said?
I like the examples that you picked, Jeremy, and I like that the feedback that time was more Socratic, because like you said, there's a mix of feedback between Socratic. It doesn't really give them the answer, but makes them think further about it, as well as some that more or less gives them the answer and kind of teaches them a lesson in the process. Are you going to show an argument question as well?
We are. That's going to be the last one that we do, and we'll probably talk more at length about that one than any of the others. The one that I have left to do is going to be a ranking question or a sequence question. And what we're really trying to do here is not show you every problem that's been developed. I do want to take maybe a minor detour. This could be a good time to do that. Let me see if I can actually find it here. It is, it's in the same window that I'm currently in. This is the American government overview sheet that we use internally. It's a Google sheet, and it has the total counts on each of the questions. So you can see that there's 91 sorting questions. Well, sorting, as you'll see in just a moment, is putting items into the right area. And that's because there's a lot of the arguments question that Glenn was just talking about. Ranking, labeling, matching, and fill in the blank. Those are all what we call the advanced graphical. And there's over 250 of those. That's going to be for this first release of this system here in the fall semester. And those are going to grow tremendously. We have all of the OpenStax test bank questions, the essay critical questions, and then the multiple choice questions from the book. And so just the numbers that you're looking at here show there are a lot of these problems available, and there's going to be more and more that do show up. The thing that we wanted to do was just to give you a sample of each of these and the way in which students interact with them, and then some of the feedback that's available. And so here what I'll do is put in maybe just a correct answer here, CND. Let's see, the cooperative, the competitive, federalism, and unitary. You can see that the items all go into a single bucket, and then students can, even after they've been added, reorganize these. I don't think that this is quite right. I think that I've switched these two, and so I can go and I can put those in now. This should give you an idea of the different questions available, and the idea, the larger theme, that students working through these exercises are just not able to guess. There's so many ways you can order these that real thought is required, and there's not just a radio button for multiple choice to click and to move on. Let's go to question 20 and look at one of the arguments questions. This is what we call sorting, because you're putting items into two different areas. And we have the private sector and government. And then below, as Glenn said earlier, points of support for the action of, I would prefer that the private sector or government take the lead when deciding how to allocate scarce common goods such as water. What I'll do before I let Glenn comment more is to put in the items that I know correspond to the private sector. The other ones correspond to government, but I want to put in something that doesn't belong. When a common good runs out, it's gone forever. And I think when we do that, when we do a submission, specific feedback is available, and the government creates regulations on goods to restrict exploitation. I would say that's very Socratic feedback, because none of the words that are included here directly correspond to this item. It's really going to force the student to think about what they need to do. I know that this is something you've done in your class now for over a decade, Glenn. Do you want to talk about this signature style question of yours a little more? You brought it up earlier, but I imagine you might have more now that we see it in this context.
Sure, yeah, this was something I really wanted us to get incorporated into the system. I've used a section of argument questions on each of my exams since the 1990s. And these are topics in each class, in each section of the class, in the time period of the exam, where I want students to think about normative aspects. In an open-ended exam, I write them in a way where the student picks a side to support, and then they develop on their own a couple points of support for their side. And it's not a gotcha question. You can get full credit on either side as long as you develop two plausible and separable points of support. That open-ended approach wasn't really doable for this system, but we came up with, I think, a nice workaround here where students are going to have a long list, if you will, of points of support. They have to think through which side of the argument the point of support fits with. And it gets them to think about logic, it gets them to think about normative aspects, because the choice between the side is a normative choice. And it's one that the student hopefully will internalize a bit as they're thinking about which side the point of support is associated with. And again, if they can have deeper learning like this across a variety of topics in each chapter, that's going to help them understand the particulars even better and the pattern better across the topics of the book.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for adding that commentary. This, I think, does it as far as showing you the environment that your students would have to go through and to complete the assignments. As you can see, they can skip around. If they wanted to log out now and come back later, they would be able to finish the assignment. You have control over the number of submission attempts and the other deductions, as we said. And as students do work like this, you're going to wind up having all of their grades automatically in your grade sheet. And then you're also going to be able to go in and see their detailed work. I'll go back over here to the class menu, and I'll just say view manage class grades. And we do have some mock students in this class and have put in some data here across the various assignments. And so now let's say that you get an email from one of the students in the class and they're curious why their first submission on arguments question wasn't accepted or why it's not right. You could go over, you could click on the numeric value. That's going to take you, and I'm zoomed in here far enough that it's making it a little hard to see, but you could zoom in on this, and then for all of the students in the class, let me actually zoom back up just a little bit. For all the students in the class, you can not only see their final answer, you can see each of the submissions that they've done along the way. And let me do up here at the top, expand to show the full grade submission history. And you can see the timestamps of when students have put in a specific answer. And for this particular one here, the student put in something that wasn't correct. And then very shortly after, they submitted a correct answer. This is nice because it's not just a grade. You can go in, look at the student's work, and then through email provide back comments about what they could think about. That is an important part of running your class. I want to do frequently asked questions and just some closeout things at this stage with the one final reiteration that if you've liked what you've seen so far, please reach out to us, let us know. And if you want a more comprehensive tour or have questions that haven't been answered, we can do that. Okay, the closing out, cost and what's included. It's $35 per semester per student. You can get either the second edition, the third edition, or both. I had shown that earlier up here. You can connect students with that directly on OpenStax, or you can have these, it's your choice. You can have these links for the second or third edition that exist on the Expert TA servers and environment. All questions from both texts, as well as questions developed by Professor Prutz exclusively for Expert TA, are in. Problem authoring, you're going to see in a few minutes. We're going to field some questions from Jack, and then we're going to go over, because it matters to some of you, the ability for you to create your own questions. It's an optional thing for a lot of you. The number of questions I showed earlier, the bank that you have, you'll just want to go in and use the assignment editor, put them in and move on. For some of you, you will want to create your own questions. And you can easily do that. And you can also make these available for use by your colleagues or others. We talked about LMS integration, having single sign-on and grade sync for all of the major systems. Deeper integration is under development and will be coming soon. And if that's of interest to you, follow up with us to find out what is included in deep integration. And then one final thing, built inside of the Expert TA system, somewhere in the coming academic year, we're going to release clicker questions. And this is really nice, where in the middle of a lecture, you can talk for 15 minutes, and then you can put a question up. Your students see it, it goes live, they can weigh in on it, and then immediately you can see a dashboard showing what percentage of the class got it right and what was the most common incorrect answer. And you can either choose to move on because the scores were high enough, or you can choose to address the most common in conception. And that is going to be included with the system at no extra charge. And I should also point out, problem authoring is in the system at no extra charge. The next thing we're going to do is answer some questions. And since these could be for any one of the entities here, I would ask that both Courtney and Glenn come back. And then after we field some of these questions, I'll share the problem authoring tool in just the few minutes that we have left.
Hey, Jeremy, I think to get started, just regarding academic integrity, I had a question about an instructor being concerned about maintaining test bank security and confidentiality. Is there anything that can be done that can ensure that test banks can't be found online? So maybe you just talk to some of our general strategies inside the system that they could implement.
One thing that I don't have set to pull up right now, maybe there'll be some other questions for Glenn and Courtney. And while they're answering those, I could pull it up. I'll pull up our main at the Expert TA email account, where I can demonstrate that we have had a line of communication with chegg.com, which is a known site where students post questions to be answered. And for the last 7 years, we have been submitting takedown notices to them. We built a web crawler that goes through the Expert TA system, and it looks for every single question, and it goes out and it tries to find it on Yahoo Answers and chegg.com, and it compiles a list of URLs of those copyright violations, and then we submit them in. We do this multiple times a week, at least once a week, and we've been doing that for 7 years. And Chegg has always responded within 24 hours, and they get the problems taken out. Any questions that are in American government are protected. Any questions that you author as an instructor are under our protective umbrella. And that is one of the things that we have been doing for some time related to academic integrity. That's not a comprehensive run through of our academic integrity, but that gives you a little idea of how important it is to us. Jack, do you think that answered the question enough?
Yeah, and we can also follow up and provide a more detailed tour after this as well. Courtney, maybe it would be good if you could just kind of reiterate. We had a couple of questions. One about the order of the book from 2E to 3E as well. And then the other one was being just for the whole group to hear the availability of the print version of 3E.
Sure. So one of our attendees asked whether the 3rd edition is going to be completely reorganized for those of you who are used to teaching from the 2nd edition. And Glenn, actually, if you have additional detail, please jump in. What I shared is that the table of contents is the same, so it is not completely reorganized. But learning outcomes, as far as I understand, learning outcomes within the chapters and sections may differ in verbiage and alignment from the 2nd edition. Glenn, do you have anything to add to that?
At the level of the chapters and then the chapter sections, everything is the same. In terms of what we're actually seeking to accomplish within a particular section, there were a few changes in the book, but at that level of analysis, it's very similar. The changes have tended to be in new coverage of topics within sections, and as well as more current imagery. We do have feature boxes that have changed a bit. We have one I'm really excited about. Early in the book, we have a feature box that has Amanda Gorman, and then we found a African-American poet who lived in DC late 19th century, who has a historic place named after a DuPont circle, and we've got one of her poems sort of side by side with Amanda Gorman. And so there's changes like that, but the general approach of the book is the same.
Thanks for that. And then in regards to the questions about formats, so the online formats will be available when the edition comes out tomorrow. So that includes the free PDF and in-browser versions. The print version, we are expecting to be ready late September, early October. And if you do prefer having a print copy, we also find that about 8% of students typically prefer to have a print copy as well. So you can always go through your campus bookstore when that time is appropriate again. So probably for spring, and order enough to cover that small percentage of students, or if you're looking for one for yourself, or have an individual who's interested, then they are also available for a low cost on Amazon.
Okay, the final question here is an instructor wondering about the user friendliness of the assignments, and then about, is there a tutorial for new students when they get into the system to help them get acquainted with Expert TA? Jeremy, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can. Not shown here, but included in our bank of questions and used and highly encouraged for instructors to use every single semester are 4 Learning Expert TA questions. At the top in the problem statement area, there's a video that normally is 2 to 6 minutes long, depending on the particular topic being covered. Students watch it and it shows them how to access their grade report, how to access their grade sheet, how to take assignments. And then below, there's a collection of multiple choice questions that let you know whether they understand how to do that. And so we make sure that instructors include those as assignment number 0 in a semester. It's going to reduce dramatically the number of emails that you receive as an instructor about how to accomplish a particular task, because the video outlines everything that they need to know. So I did, while Courtney was talking earlier, I logged into main@theexpertta.com just to show our web crawler and our history of communication with Chegg. So I searched for copyright agent at chegg.com, and you can see a whole bunch of example emails here, and I'll just click back and just choose one from down here to give you the nature of it. So this is all the way back in December 28th of 2018 at 11 in the morning. And it just says, in the past, you promptly removed our copyrighted content. We appreciate your quick consideration. Here's another attached report, and it's an Excel sheet that has hundreds of URLs, all related to our questions and the solution posted to that. And you can see here that very quickly they let us know, thank you for bringing this to our attention. The content you reported has been removed. We then rerun our web crawler and make sure that they did, in fact, take all of those down. And I will reiterate that your questions will be under this protective umbrella, and our web crawler will seek those out, and we can provide takedown notices to Chegg for those also. That's in addition to the other deterrence and AI features that you saw. The last comment about academic integrity, I said earlier, it's not our favorite topic. We want students to learn, so we've built all these great exercises. But if you don't have any sort of protections, students will wind up shooting themselves in the foot. They don't realize that they're not learning by looking something up, and they're ill prepared for midterms and exams. And so all of these things are to help the students. Those are all of the questions that Jack felt like bringing in, and we still have 8 minutes left. I would like to show the problem authoring tool, making sure that I point out that this is an optional thing, that many of you will be satisfied with the questions that we've developed. But should you want to create your own questions, I just want to see what that environment looks like. And so I'll go in and I'll show that now. I'm logged in here, and it looks like perhaps I should zoom in just a little bit here as well. So I'm logged in here into a content area where I have one book called Problem Authoring Demonstrations, and I created a chapter called American Government. And now there's a few sections, a development area where I was playing around earlier, and a webinar for today where we can put a few questions. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. And I think with us zoomed in so far, I probably will not be able to get all of this on one page. Multiple choice and multiple select problems are very easy to create. You can do that in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. I wanted to create something that was just a little harder. And so we've got a drag and drop question here. This is one that Glenn designed that is part of our library. And I thought we might just recreate it so that you could get a feel for the environment. So we've got problem 332. We've got a problem in I keep calling it a problem, but a question in a part statement, and then the number of draggable items. What you can do when you have your authoring environment is you can create chapters and organize your material however you want. You could do this by week, by lecture, so you have complete control over the organization of the material. When you are down to the chapter or section level, you can add problems. So here I'm going to say, let's create a new problem. And this is problem 3.3.2, and I'll just put webinar. You can specify whether you want this only to be assignable by instructors or also available in the student practice area. I didn't show this in the environment. The students do have an area where they can go, and a selected number of questions are there that they can just practice and play around with. And then down below, you have things for randomizing variables, and then also words and phrases. You have an area where you can upload relevant images, which we will do in just a moment. And so the top part here may not be readable over in the Word document, but the problem statement says, match the correct directions of power to their government systems. There is an image that you can see here that's going to be part of the drag and drop. So I can come in now and go to American Government Webinar, and I'll just choose that background image. It's added into my carousel. And if I had other images that were used in the problem, this one's not, but you can see that you can add as many images as you want. And then if it's the main image that shows up as part of the top part of the problem, you can just drag it and bring it over here. We don't have that in this case. Below, I can create multi-step questions. There's no reason why it just has to be one. If there's a part A, part B, and part C where you're progressively having a student think through something, you can accomplish that. Here, there is just one part. And from the drop-down, I have all of the question types. This is going to be a drag and drop. Now, arguably, just like any program like Photoshop, you're not going to go in and be a master of it in 3 minutes or just see how it works. This is not nearly as complicated as Photoshop. However, you would want to get our authoring user manual, and you would want to look through the best practices for drag and drop questions, because there's quite a bit of configuration that can be done to make these very flexible. The first thing I'll do is I'll just get the background image in here. Okay, so then the next thing that I'm going to do is I've already got a little bit of thought about the structure. These are the buckets, basically, of this. And so I know a little bit about sizes. And the recommendation here is 100 by 45. And so I can go in and say, I'm going to set all of the buckets to be 100 by 45. I know this might look overwhelming with the amount of configuration, but it's just really a lot of it is formatting so that you can make things look the colors that you want, the way that you want for borders, colors, for background colors, and things like that. And so I'm going to say that the items are this size. We can see in just a moment that if we needed to adjust those, it's not going to be that difficult to do. Okay, so I have several items. There's 3. I have national government, I have people, and I have states. So let me add just one more down here at the bottom. There's tons of recommendations in the author manual about how to leave some extra space at the top or the bottom. And these are where the draggable items will start when the student first comes to the screen. And so now as I click on an item here, you can see this is item 1, 2, and 3. And I can come in now and make this. So hit caps lock. So national government. And as I save changes to that, you see it show up. It may not be clear with the resolution you've got in this, but it's a little crowded. So what I'll do is just hit backspace and return so that I can make that appear on 2 different rows. And then for the other ones, I have people, and I also have states. Let me get this capitalized at the beginning as well. Okay, one thing I'll point out here is that this doesn't look very professional. We really strive for that when we design questions. The general Canvas settings, this is under best practices as well. You can change the grid size, and you can also show the grid. And at different stages of the problem, it's good to do that, because now I can come in here and guarantee that these all line up at the top. And now I can see that they line up and are equally spaced because they've got 2 10-pixel distances between those. So there's some helpful things in here for designing professional, nice looking problems. Okay, next, I don't just have one of national government that shows up in here. I've got several. So as I click on it, I get the national government panel to the side, and I can duplicate. And notice how I've got items 1, 2, and 3. Well, as I click duplicate 3 times, it's going to do 4, 5, and 6. I can do 1, 2, 3. So now I should have 4 of each of these, and there's a total of 12. And it looks like I moved this down a little bit, and I'm just going to leave it there for now. A next simple step, and again, there's short, quick start instructions for this for you in the manual, but you set the initial configuration. That means what's the student going to arrive at. There's a shortcut when you're doing fill in the blank reading or drag and drop labeling where there's one item in one bucket, such that you don't have to actually go create all the buckets. You can simply drag the item, which I'm going to put the correct answer in here, NPS, national, and then I've got down here states, national government, and national government. And I can just choose the create buckets from items. Now, not only has it put the buckets in the right place, it's created a table for the answer, showing the corresponding correct answer for all of these, each of the buckets and the correct item that goes into it. And then finally, if I wanted to put in some sort of incorrect pairing, a common mistake that students might make, they might say that states go down to people here. I can say set partial credit pairing, and now I get an item that says if this item, which is people, goes into this bucket, you can specify an amount of credit you think that's worth, and then I'll just put some sort of a statement there. This is as hard as it is to create a drag and drop question. I got this a little bit lower. Again, you could take the time not to do that, but we have just created a drag and drop labeling question in a fairly straightforward manner. As you can imagine, doing something like multiple choice, true, false, multi-select is even easier than this. All of the question types that you saw today, you have the ability to go in and to create those, and we give you a lot of template materials to work with. And then the final statement that I'll say, which really can be leveraged by instructors, I'll just save this. I'm going to get back out to my main content area. One thing that we're seeing in other subjects done a lot is that you can copy problems from the Expert TA library so that you could come up, choose problems from the American government book. You could choose a chapter, And you could then come over and choose your own book and specify the section that you want those to go in and say, perform that copy. And now you could use this as the foundation if you like one of the questions that you see, but you want to make some sort of a slight modification to that. You're going to be able to do that very easily. And this would also be a good Kickstarter for you understanding how questions are developed in addition to the instructor problem authoring user's manual. That's all that I wanted to see, is that it's a possibility. Remember, this is optional. The library of questions we're creating is quite comprehensive, and we hope that it's going to satisfy everyone. But often on a quiz, especially, or an exam, instructors like to author their own materials. This allows you to accomplish that. I would just say I'm excited about what we've all created here together. There's a reason why this is in the 3rd edition. It's a really wonderful textbook that's well thought out, and we're happy about the partnership and to be able to work directly with the lead author so that everything that we do here matches with the scope and sequence. Thank you all for your time. Glenn, Courtney, I know you probably have some things to add.
I would just chime in and agree. And thank you, all of you, for being here. Those of you who stuck around and were able to see all of the detail about the problem authoring tool and hear more about the book itself. And Dr. Kreutz, for all of your work on the book, and Expert TA for your partnership over the years. Always a pleasure to work with you guys.
And likewise, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Courtney and OpenStax, for being great partners. Thank you, Jeremy and team at Expert TA. Been a really, really fun partnership so far. And I think this will really deepen student learning. I'm really excited about it.
Wonderful. Okay, with that, we'll close out the webinar. Thanks again to everyone for joining.